In the era of AI, we need a more sensible way to measure our personal progress because things are changing so rapidly that using the SMART goal method feels like a Stone Age way of doing things. And for most people, let's be honest, who use this nowadays, it leads to failure or dissatisfaction. Not to say that 5-year and 10-year plans do not have their place, but in a world where things are changing every 6 months, how do we begin to grapple with what progress even looks like now? Welcome to an episode of the Habit Chess podcast. On this show, I like to talk about training everyday skills so you can make moves. My name is Misbah Haque, and I have over 10 plus years of experience coaching executives, athletes, and high performers from all walks of life. And I wanted to focus this episode on a concept that I discovered from Tiny Experiments by Dr. Anne-Laure Lecomte. It has completely revolutionized the way that I look at goal setting and really productivity overall. Let's be honest, one of the things that we're all looking for is a process or method that we can enjoy, something that we can stick with, right? Something that's not just another New Year's resolution that fizzles out. And I think something that doesn't just require all or nothing, because so many goals that are set for us externally or versions of goals that we see are basically really extreme versions that come at a cost of so many other things. And I found that this concept from Tiny Experiments really allows you to focus on your own life and what you want and what makes sense for you, instead of constantly feeling guilty about, what this version or end result looks like, as is very common when setting SMART goals. One of the biggest issues I've noticed with most goal setting frameworks are that they ignite subconsciously a failure loop. And this is very dangerous because what this does is every time you do not reach a goal that you have set for yourself, whether it is small or big, it withers away at this trust that you have with yourself. And this is dangerous because if you do this long enough, it's that feeling of not hitting your goals every year. When you come back to, New Year's time, you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't actually do that more than a couple weeks. That feeling, you experience that on a micro level, on a daily level. Eventually, you don't really desire more, or you don't even question what more you can achieve. You feel a little more scattered. And so similar to downloading a bunch of productivity apps or habit apps, but then never really opening them up again. That is a common problem that is faced with this big surge of motivation that we have when we want to plan and, think about our vision. But there's a couple biases that she mentions in here that come into play. And one of them is the overconfidence bias. So when you are planning, similar to when you do a to-do list for the day, you might put way more items on there, tasks on there, than you actually have the time to complete. And this is something that comes into play when we set things like SMART goals for ourselves. And there's this wonderful chart on page 69 of this book that shows side by side the linear mindset and then the experimental mindset. And so the linear mindset shows kind of the goal setting framework that is the SMART goals. And then the more experimental mindset is what we call the PACT method. And so what I really love about this is the first part shows the response to uncertainty. It covers that. In the linear mindset, you've got, not knowing the destination triggers anxiety, right? Having this uncertainty feels really bad. Versus in the experimental mindset, not knowing the destination triggers curiosity, right? And it kind of welcomes that. It's kind of built in to the process. And then the next cell is like the mental model of growth. So mental model of growth has, in the linear mindset, you've got ladders, right? Lists of milestones with predictable outcomes. And then the experimental mindset has loops. So these are cycles of experiments with unpredictable outcomes. So again, notice we're comforting and welcoming the fact that uncertainty is okay, right? Versus it's a sign of failure. And then the definition of success. In the linear mindset, you've got it being very outcome-based. So it's a predefined success focused on a fixed destination, for example, publishing a cookbook by the end of the year. Now, the experimental mindset version of that is output-based. Emergent success focused on deliberate experimentation. Write one new recipe every week until the end of the year. And again, notice how that is very process focused. And then of course, the last part is the goal setting framework here. And it shows how you've got SMART goals in the linear mindset, which again stand for specific, measurable, assignable, realistic, and timely. And then in the experimental mindset, this method is called the PACT method. And the PACT stands for purposeful, actionable, continuous, and trackable. And what's really cool is I found that this is like minimalism for your mind. So you can still do a lot of the complex things that you might be doing, but you need a simple way to kind of frame that in your brain so it doesn't feel so overwhelming. And the way that you write this pact is I will action for duration. And so it sounds super simple, but this is what's so profound about it, is that the duration is the really important part here. So you are setting a certain number of trials that you are going to, basically conduct for this experiment. So instead of, a habit is something that is never ending. Okay, I'm going to, write this one recipe every single day for the rest of my life, right? That is a habit. It's a never ending thing, no expiration date. But this duration of writing one recipe until the end of the year, or writing one recipe for 100 recipes, writing one recipe for, 12 weeks or 4 weeks. One of the cool things about the pact is that the shorter the duration, the better. So you want this growth loop, which is the opposite of this failure loop, to be a common thing where trial and error is very normalized, because that we know at this point is how we learn best, when there is micro struggles and failures and things that make us really wrestle with certain processes, right? That's when our skills really develop and flourish. And so it's normalizing that. Instead of when you look at SMART goals, you're constantly faced with what you don't have. And there's this like not really being satisfied until you get there. And it almost, I've noticed it takes your focus away. It shifts it, even if by a few degrees, onto things you can't control and away from the process, most importantly. And so what I love about the pact is it's very, very process focused. And so if you set this experiment of writing one recipe for, 10 recipes, that is something that you can repeat over and over. So once you get to the end of 10, you can actually ask yourself, okay, what do I want to change? What do I want to improve? What do I want to refine? And you could repeat technically writing one recipe for the rest of your life like you would maybe a habit you're trying to ingrain. But what's really cool is it's something that you can pivot. It's something that you can refine. It's an experiment. And it's a trial, really, is what she calls it. And, as long as you complete the trial, as long as you show up, that is what success looks like. So that's something that she pointed out when defining the trackable part, the T in the pact, is that, it is not so much numbers focused. It is not just a KPI the way you would have, certain outcomes. You can still have that. There's still a place for those things. But again, with KPIs, what actually contributes KPIs? Well, it's actually a process or a series of processes. And so what this does is the trackable part is simply considering, did you do it or not? You're trying to set up a scenario where you can answer that question. And of course, you want to do this in a way that is very, very doable. It's not very resource intensive, and you'll actually be able to complete the trial. Now, the other temptation that you have with the pact is to do multiple experiments at once. And, I did break this rule. I'm running 2 at once right now. But I would say the second one is more so a lifelong habit I'm trying to develop. And so it's something that, it's kind of second in the order of the pacts that I have. The first one is really most important. And what's cool is it's going to be 4 weeks for me. And I'm not setting it as that duration. I'm setting a certain number of repetitions of something that I'm doing. And by the way, the reason I'm not revealing to you exactly what it is I'm doing is because I don't want to get the dopamine hit of just telling you about what I'm doing. I will reveal the results of what I'm doing later on in another episode. And so what you'll notice with the PAC method is that you instantly feel less anxiety and you feel more focus and you feel more absorbed, I would say, in the process instead of absorbed in the anxiety of the outcome and how far away you are from it. Now, this next, tool that she mentions later on in the book, I did a separate episode on it, but I'll mention it again here. It's called the plus minus next method. And so the plus minus next method is simply 3 columns. And this is kind of a way of observing and questioning and thinking about your own thinking. It's called metacognition. And basically this tool is something that takes like 5 minutes. You can do it weekly. You can do it, daily if you wanted to. I do it periodically every couple days or so. But based off of the tiny experiments that you're running and really anything overall, if you want to expand it to that, I find it a great way to organize your thinking if you feel scattered. And so what you do is basically you have 3 columns. In the plus column, you notice what are all the positive things I've noticed or that have happened around this experiment or outside. And you basically list those things. And then in the minus column, you list, okay, what were the obstacles? What were the challenges? What were the things that didn't go as I expected? And notice how even the way that you question the minus part of this is not like an attack on yourself or a failure for not meeting this goal yet, right? It is very process focused, and that distance allows you to kind of point out some of the things that are essential for growth. And these things are, often something that we pay other people hundreds and thousands of dollars to point out for us. And so it's a skill worth developing, being able to, point this stuff out in yourself, looking at yourself more as a series of experiments and kind of a lab. The next column is really fun because this is where you actually implement certain things from the plus and minus section, where it feels like you're actually directly going to implement them in the next 24 hours into your tiny experiment. So if I'm focused on, let's say my pact is I'm going to work out for, 30 minutes every day for 30 days. And then, I might back it off and do 5 days or 3 days a week or something like that, right? So what I might note in the minus column is, hey, when I worked out or when I planned to work out at the end of the day, I missed a lot of the workouts. Like I was not able to keep up with it. So in the next column, I might say, okay, try working out first thing in the morning, try working out midday. And that might be something that I actually implement. But notice how you normally don't get the chance to frame it that way when you are using these other linear frameworks, right? Where if you miss a day and you break the chain, all of a sudden everything's screwed and you're, it's over, right? Versus I find that this really does focus on you, of course, showing up, but it allows you, if you, bite too much off, that you can chew, because I often do that where I'm like, okay, this is a little too big and I need to maybe bring it down a bit. It allows you to reflect on that in a way that you normally wouldn't. Like, okay, well, why am I not able to meet this goal that I've had for a year? Why is this process so difficult, right? How do I break this down in a more doable way? And so all of these things have an opportunity to happen in a way that you normally wouldn't get to, right? Because it's an experiment. So you're exploring, you're curious, you're asking questions. And that uncertainty that we typically feel when we set a goal is something that feels much more welcomed. And so the reason that I feel that this is so applicable in the age of AI is because things are changing so rapidly and we can no longer, look at something and go, here's what I want, to achieve in 5 years, because things may look completely different, right? You can have that, a version of that, but then really what motivates you day to day is going to be something process oriented like this. And I found that the serendipity that can occur from some of this is very awesome. Like that's what we want to happen, is cool stuff that comes out of an opportunity that we didn't expect because we were just so focused on the process, right? That's what happened to me with my very first podcast, the Airborne Mind Show. After, within a year of actually doing that show, I got my dream job in the Bay Area, coaching Fortune 1000 executives and athletes and all those folks, right? That is something that I could not have planned or predicted. It's something that was born out of just me trying to keep up with doing one episode a week on the show at that time. The Diary of a CEO is an example that was listed in here where it caught my attention. The CEO, Stephen Bartlett, he basically decided that he wanted to write a tweet, screenshot the tweet, and share it on his Instagram every single day. And what that turned into after a long time was 2 million followers. And it, of course, wasn't just from doing these written tweets. He has crazy epic shorts and all that stuff too. But it's really the idea that, he really got people connected to him through his writing by committing to this process of sharing his writing every single day. And he did this at 7 p.m. every single day and spent about an hour doing it. So invested that hour. And, he did that, I believe, for a year before it turned into something pretty insane. And so I love that example of focusing on something that's very process oriented, even if it is, something AI related. It doesn't allow you to set something out so far in advance where, you'll get disinterested and you will lose interest in the process. So the coolest thing about all this is you become a scientist of your own life. You set up these growth loops and you experiment for life. You're going to be doing this forever. And so this allows you to do things, I found, even on like a 10-day or 7-day basis, where I'm going to run this experiment for 7 days. I'm going to know what happens. And then I have a chance to actually reflect and kind of run the next 7 days maybe slightly differently, right? And see the results of that. This is something you would not always get the chance to do in traditional frameworks. And it reminds me of my programming days when I was writing fitness programs for clients all over the world and for gyms as well. And the way that you would structure these programs week to week, they would build upon each other, right? And you would have these testing periods of, hey, every 2 weeks or so, we're going to observe what happened in the past 2 weeks. And, were our assumptions correct? And so similar to, that, you're applying a similar type of philosophy to your own life and the things that you want to achieve. And so I think what's exciting about this is when you design your pact, it gives you the space to actually think, like, what's a tiny thing I want to experiment with? Similar to the author here, experimenting with a writing career. She wrote an article every single day, Monday through Friday, because she had no other, not many other commitments at the time, and then was going to do that for 100 days, and then was able to back that down to basically, I think 3 times a week, and then eventually once a week, without lessening the impact. And she's able to still do that, and it's flourishing years and years later. And of course, has written this masterpiece. And so I really recommend you check out the full book, Tiny Experiments. I think you're going to enjoy it. This is a process that I think you can implement immediately after you turn this off. So I hope you do that. Thank you for hanging out. Make sure to like, subscribe, review wherever you're at. It's greatly appreciated. And check out the links in the description below to make sure to sign up for the Habit Chest newsletter. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you on the next one.